What's up everyone, it's Bells. Welcome back to my channel. So today I am starting a series where we are going to go through the entire traditional tarot deck, and I'm going to pick books that I love that correspond to each card. We're going to start off with the major arcana. I will be taking you through the Fool's Journey with books that I felt suited each and every card. This does not correspond with my tarot TBR prompts. These are totally separate book recommendations based off of all of the tarot cards. I'm just really excited, so let's just get right into it. Let's bring on the books. So the cards that I'll be using today are, of course, from the Tarot of the Divine Tarot card deck by Yoshi Yoshitani. It is a gorgeous deck based off of fairy tales and folklore from around the world. So we are, of course, starting with the Fool, who will take us through the whole of the Fool's Journey. So the Fool is the beginning of the journey, the beginning of life. They are full of innocent faith that is kind of required to take on the journey of life. It is a coming of age card. It is a free spirit. For the Fool card, what I picked was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. If you don't know what it's about, Coraline goes through a wonderful magical door into a different realm where the beldam threatens to steal her away from her family. And she must fight back and free herself and everybody else. I think the most important thing to know about this book and why it works with the Fool is that Coraline is innocent. She is a child. She is beginning her journey of life and has the naivete to rush headlong into a battle with the beldam because she doesn't have the fears that adults generally have that could possibly stop her. She is brash and headstrong and ready to go. And so I think this is the perfect way to start our journey with the Fool. Not to say that Coraline is a fool, because she's incredibly smart. Our next card in the journey is the Magician. So basically, the Magician and the High Priestess, which come next, are the first things that a child realizes when they come into the world. The Magician is like the positive, not positive as in good, but positive as in like the plus sign. And they are the active, like outward expression of choices. It is manifestation and power and self-confidence and resourcefulness. That is the Magician. The book that I picked for this was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. This is a thriller, a Norwegian thriller that follows two characters, Lisbeth and Mikael, as they basically try to take down and solve this mystery. Why I picked them for the Magician, I really picked the characters more than the book, even though the book is fantastic. Lisbeth and Mikael are active and confident and resourceful characters that make very immediate choices to better the world. The balance that is a part of our world affects them as well, but they are powerful, and in the end they do find victory, which is all I'll tell you about it. You should go read it. Definite trigger warning on this though. The next card, like I mentioned, is the High Priestess. So the High Priestess is the opposite of the positive. She is the negative sign and is really like the unconscious, the unrealized potential and creativity. This is the Fool as a baby, like understanding that your brain is separate than what's going on in the real world. This is like intuition, divine feminine, maybe the subconscious mind. The most important thing is that these two cards, the Magician and the High Priestess, balance each other out. Without the active masculine forces, we cannot have the feminine unconscious forces. The book that I picked for the High Priestess is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Full disclosure, I have not finished this book yet, but it may be my favorite book of the year if it continues on as it is. It's a fantasy written by a woman for women. It is unlike anything I've ever read before, and kind of centers around a woman who was trained by a spiritual leader, by a high priestess, to protect. It's the only choice I could possibly have picked for this card. I think the balance of a female-focused fantasy versus a very active crime thriller that centers around the impact that men have on women, I think they balance each other out really well. The next card in the Fool's Journey is the Empress, which represents the mother. It's kind of how a baby explores the world of nature and sensation and abundance. This card is like femininity and nature and nurturing and accomplishment, fertility, all those lovely things. So what I picked for this was The Woman Who Would Be King, Hatshepsut's Rise to Power in Ancient Egypt by Kara Cooney. This is the story of King Hatshepsut. She is a woman who held the highest rank in Egypt. She was not queen, she was king, she was pharaoh, and came before Cleopatra. So this is someone who we don't really know a lot about. Only recently have people started unearthing her history and her story. She is the epitome of balancing the feminine and the masculine. She was a mother who was both beloved by her daughters and betrayed by her son. It is about like female rule and the beauty of the ancient Egyptian mythology, and an exploration for us as people of the reality of history and how powerful women are. That's something that's been quashed in history for a very long time. I think it's a very important story to tell, and it was a wonderfully written historical document, but also story of how this woman may have lived her life. And I think that's the perfect example for the Empress. She accomplished the most she possibly could, more than anyone could ever have expected of a woman in that time. So, wonderfulness. If we have an Empress, we must have an Emperor. And so this represents the father. This is the structure of the world, the rules and behaviors that the fool must follow for their well-being. The Emperor is authority, structure, stability, leadership, all those lovely things. The book that I picked for the Emperor is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is the story of the Tudors from Thomas Cromwell's perspective, which is one that we don't often see, because why would we want the story of a bureaucrat when all of the bullshit that's going on with the royals is so fascinating. This is a historical fiction that will ruin all other historical fictions for you, I promise. It's a story of the bureaucracy of Renaissance era royal families. It's an example of the complete authority of the king during this time, how easily something so stable can fall. And it kind of represents all of the horrors and the requirements of succeeding in the Middle Ages. It's written in like second person the whole time. So just go into it knowing that every time Hilary Mantel writes she's talking about Thomas Cromwell. It's still from his perspective. It's just written weird. It took me like probably this much of the book to figure that out. So I'm just warning you ahead of time, but it's fantastic. Now the fool has ventured out of their home. They are beginning to learn the beliefs and traditions of their culture. And so we meet the hierophant. This is when the fool begins their education, learns to identify with a group, kind of discovers this idea of belonging, and learns to conform to society successfully as a child. The book that represented this the best to me was No Heaven for Good Boys by Keisha Bush. And this is the story of the Talibé. I've talked about this book before. I thought it was just wonderful. And it's about the story of a boy who's taken out of his home to learn the beliefs of his culture, but it's really about the betrayal of his master. And it kind of shows both the benefits and the detriments of these age-old traditions. The boy learns how to live in a group, make friends, fight for survival, and try to make it back to his family. It's devastating in how it's written so simply. That is what I picked for the hierophant. So our fool has grown up, and now they are needing to decide on their own beliefs and values. They are craving a relationship, to be with someone. This is the lovers, of course. This represents love, harmony, relationships, trust, choices, having to decide on something, and like a leap of faith. I picked one of my favorite books of all time. This is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This follows two sisters who go separate ways in the world and kind of defy what they were brought up to believe and decide on their own values, learn who to trust, and take leaps of faith in love and life and survival. I could talk about this book all day. I have talked about this book all day. I love it. It's a fantastic standalone fantasy, and I think is a great representation of the process of learning what beliefs we want to keep for ourselves, and once we're in the world, what beliefs that don't serve us any longer. It's also cute and has a little romance in it, so I think it suited it. We are past the lovers, and the fool is a grown-up. The chariot represents the ego, your self-control, the confidence of youth, that like 20-year-old feeling of invincibility. That is where the fool is at the chariot. And this card represents control and success, determination, a victory, a journey. Of course, it's a chariot. The book I picked for this is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This is the epitome of a journey. This is an adult fairy tale about a young man with the confidence of youth who attacks every problem until there is a solution, whether he should have or not. And through the process of the story grows from that boyish sense of invincibility to become a confident and calm young man with the help of a literal star. It's super fun. If you like fairy tales and fantasy and Neil Gaiman's writing, you'll like this. As life goes on, of course, it presents new challenges, and so our fool must develop their strength, courage, resolve to keep going, and they discover the benefit of patience and tolerance. This is strength. This card represents courage and compassion, and it's more like the strength of your heart and your purpose than it is like your actual like physical strength. The book I picked for strength was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which, as you all know if you've been following me for a while, was another one of my favorites of last year. This is a story about a woman who must have strength of purpose and heart to save her cousin and herself from a horrible patriarchal family and the weird, strange, evil pole of the house that they are trapped in. And I think that the character in this book, and honestly in most Gothic horrors, must have strength of heart and purpose in order to continue with the horrible things that they have to go through and survive. So that is what I picked for strength. Life has presented challenges. The Fool is dealing with those challenges, but kind of starts asking why. Why are we here? Why am I doing this at all? So this is the Hermit. And the Hermit kind of represents that need to find a deeper truth to the meaning of life. It represents introspection, soul searching, kind of like withdrawing from society, meditating, being alone. That's kind of like the Hermit for you. The book that I felt suited the Hermit the best was When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. And this is a story that follows a detective who is trying to unravel the mystery of his parents' disappearance. But the way that it does this is by going through his diary entries. It kind of wanders through and replicates very well the path that our mind takes when we were thinking or introspecting or problem solving. It's kind of a story of discovering how our mind even functions and if we can trust all of our memories that we have. It is so atmospheric and meditative and reflective, and it will definitely make you reflect on yourself and questioning your own beliefs and like where they came from and if they still serve you today. So I think that a book that can do that successfully as a fictional story, it's not like a self-help book, absolutely deserves the spot of the Hermit card. As the Fool is introspecting, learning all these things about themselves, they start to understand the universe a little bit better. This is the Wheel of Fortune. So the Fool is recognizing maybe their destiny or realizing the beauty in the order of the world. And so the Wheel of Fortune symbolizes good luck, destiny, a turning point, kind of like the cycles of life and death and cause and effect, all those things. The book that I picked for this, I love talking about this book, is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. So this is about women's suffrage in America, but in a parallel universe where women are marginalized because they used to be witches. And it's, of course, a struggle between good and bad, good witchcraft, evil witches, but it's also a story about destiny, about how these three sisters are the prophesied ones to take on the evil. It's the story of a world that we can't possibly understand, but that our characters find fascinating and beautiful and worth fighting for. And it represents destiny and karma in a way that destiny may be wonderful and it may be horrible, but there's always balance and order in the chaos that is everyday life. So as the Fool is learning about the world, experiencing the order of chaos, they start to take responsibility for their past and their decisions. This is justice. This card represents fairness and a truth, law, harmony, equality, virtue, all the things that should be prevalent when we talk about justice. The book I picked for this was Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. It's basically about like a hostage situation, but with absolutely chaotic characters. It's really about like the harmony between people and empathizing with them and learning to empathize with them and like looking beyond yourself. And it's also pretty solidly talking about how morality does not always line up with the finality of traditional law enforcement. It's real up my alley if you couldn't tell. But I thought this was a great example of that concept of justice and in caring about other people that really reflects this step in the Fool's journey. So the Fool's taking responsibility for their actions, they're moving forward with their life. It's time to turn everything upside down. So the Hanged Man represents that. It represents some kind of experience that will test the Fool's ability to move on. In order to move forward with life and with their path, the Fool has to accept the change and relinquish control. This card represents surrender, letting go, suspension, restriction, improvement, and sacrifice. The book I picked for this is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. There is no better example of sacrifice and restriction and the need to let go than the tragedy of Achilles as seen through Patroclus' eyes. This story was wonderful and devastating, and I think the hype is warranted for. So I thought that was a great example for our hanged man part of the journey. After something so drastic, so significant in your life, it's the death of your familiar self. It's about changing old habits, transitioning, and it's a difficult transition, but one that becomes a better, more fulfilling life. Death represents endings, change, transformation, maybe loss. The book I picked for this, I just read and I freaking loved, and it was The Ballerinas by Rachel Kapelk-Dale. I realize I've been saying this wrong this whole time. This is about a woman who is actively trying to be better and is really bad at it. God, for most of the book, she just sucks. And she's so selfish. But it's a story about the death of that person and becoming new and better and how much work it takes to become a better person. And it's also about the people who are around you, who are willing to forgive you, and the people who aren't. And I think that's really important in this concept of like transitioning into a new place. It's not everybody who you were hanging out with before are gonna hang out with you after the fact, and I think that's okay. Also, it's about ballerinas and the politics of the Paris Ballet. You literally can't go wrong. After this new creation, this new person, the Fool's been through a lot since the Hermit's introspective suggestion. So we get temperance. We get the balance and the stability and the patience. The Fool gets a bit of a frickin' break. The book that I thought represented this really interestingly is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. So this is a story about a young man who learns that patience kind of too late. He's an older man who's telling the story of when he was a younger man and didn't treat women very well and didn't learn how his actions impacted those around him. He spends a lot of the story like reconciling with himself and his baser instincts and learning, but he kind of learns too late. And it's a very melancholy, sad story, but also strangely hopeful. I think it presents the idea that you can be calm and confident and still know that you've made mistakes that you regret. Temperance, we're relaxed, we're balanced, we're feeling good. The devil is what comes next. And the devil is that like knot of ignorance or hopelessness within each of us that attracts us to the material world and basically traps the Fool. I like to think of this as like the concept of a midlife crisis. This represents restriction, addiction, violence, all those lovely things. And so the book I picked for this one was White Ivy by Susie Yang. This is a story about a young woman who has lifelong insecurities that manifest into very dark tendencies. I mean, she is someone who manipulates and lies to everybody to get what she wants. And the story is violent, but more in its words and its feelings than in like actual physical violence. It is dark and it's sexual and it does not have a happy ending. And I think Ivy is the epitome of the tarot card devil, is that knot of ignorance and insecurity. I think it's a wonderful character study and a really interesting anti-hero story. And if you like complicated women, you'll probably really enjoy that book. How does one release themselves from the devil but by sudden, seemingly catastrophic change? This is, of course, the Tower. This represents chaos, upheaval, catastrophe. If this card comes up, there's some changes going on. The whole point of the Tower is to have that crazy change to bring about revelation, to bring about humanity of some kind. The book I picked for this was Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune, which may seem different because it's, you know, a hopeful, inspiring T.J. Klune story. But it's about a man who finds his humanity after he's already died. What could possibly be more catastrophic than actually dying? That's the only book I could possibly make sense for this. It is the epitome of the chaos that the Tower brings and how that can bring about a better, more humane, more learned person. Keep in mind with that one, of course, it is dealing with subjects of death. So if that is something that triggers you, I think read that book with care. And I just like want you to keep that in mind. So there is a revelation, there is chaos, and after the chaos, there is the star. The Fool is calm and hopeful. There is a faith in themselves. Star represents hope and purpose and serenity, maybe spirituality. And so the book that I thought represented this really well was The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. I love this book. This is like a book lover's dream book. And it's very hopeful about two people who don't have hope for the future whatsoever after traumas that they've gone through. And through the power of books and the library and friendship, they unite and bring hope to themselves and to the world. And it's a very joyful story that deals with a lot of intense topics, but centers around like the love of library, the love of words, how that can bring people together. I think it only suits a book-related video for the most hopeful card to be a hopeful story about books. Now, unfortunately, that bliss from the star can lead to a bit of vulnerability to the illusions from the moon. In the moon, we are susceptible to fantasy, a false picture of the truth. It might stimulate the imagination and the creativity. There's also a lot of fear that comes out of that. This card represents illusion, anxiety, intuition, trickery, and kind of like the subconscious as a whole. The book that I picked for this one, another favorite of last year, was Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. This is the story of a little boy who is caught up in a battle between good and evil, as like a gist of this story. And it's like about a town that works together to kind of stop the end of the world. Most importantly, it is about the fear and trickery and illusions that can come when people are confident in what they're doing and that they're doing the right thing and are willing to do anything to achieve whatever that right thing is. That concept of morality is very black and white and is something that can easily be taken advantage of, and that is what this is about. Also, lots of religious commentary in here, which I really enjoyed. This is a horror, by the way, if you couldn't tell. So if you're not into it, this might not be for you. Thankfully, after the moon, there's the sun, and the sun brings clarity and enlightenment. It is positivity and warmth and fun and joy and confidence. The sun is a good frickin' card. Obviously, what book could I possibly pick but House in the Cerulean Sea? Also by TJ Klune. How could I not? This book is positivity and warmth incarnate. It will fill your heart and give you enthusiasm for the world and for your loved ones. You know, it's a story about a man who doesn't have any of that and goes on to experience the feeling of the sun, that clarity, that joy for the first time in his life, and defies everything for it. It's something that makes me smile this much has to be for the sun card, you know? So we are almost to the end of the Fool's journey. This fool has been through a lot, probably not really a fool anymore. And after the sun, what comes from clarity is judgment. The day of reckoning has arrived, the fool has been reborn, is absolved. It's time for them to follow their like final dreams and wishes. The book I picked for this is Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. In Seven Husbands, Evelyn has spent her whole life on an emotional roller coaster, similar to the fool, and is settling into and basically absolving herself of her sins and telling her real story. And it's a story of forgiveness and new perspectives and improving yourself and second and third and fourth and fifth chances. A story that is really centered around absolution and that judgment in a good way reflects this card very well. After the day of reckoning, after the fool has been absolved, we are completing the cycle with the world. Life is full and meaningful and the future is good. Kind of show that the fool's journey is not that foolish. Life's journey is something that's worth going on. The world represents completion, integration, maybe travel, accomplishment, triumph, celebration, all those wonderful things that come at the end of a long journey. What could I possibly pick then? The Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I wanted to pick a saga, a story that felt like a lifelong adventure, and this is that. The resolution to this trilogy will give you that faith in humanity. It will fill your heart and give you emotional catharsis and that like feeling of completion. As a whole, it questions why we live and what's beyond and how to keep going at the end of an already long journey. That's the end of our Fool's Journey. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe, like, it means a lot to me. What books would you have picked for these? Do you want to see the next installment in the series? Let me know. I love hearing your thoughts on everything. I loved putting this all together, so if this was something you enjoyed, please let me know. I love you all so much. Thanks for hanging out and having a good, cozy time talking about books. It's a good time. I'll see you all next week.